The earth shook beneath the stride of Albertosaurus, a hunter carved from bone and fury. Its eyes glowed with hunger sharp and unrelenting as the sun burned through the clouds. This was no shadow, but a force that ruled with raw power and ruthless speed. Every step carried promise of pursuit. Every breath echoed with the weight of survival. The forest bowed in silence when it passed the river, stilled as if listening. Life scattered before it, yet destiny followed in its wake. In the age of giants, few could match its terror. Albertosaurus was a storm-made flesh. The land of the late Cretaceous was a place both brutal and breathtaking. Vast plains stretched out toward the horizon, filled with herds of grazing creatures that moved like rivers of flesh and bone. Towering forests broke the plains with thick shadows, where smaller reptiles and mammals scurried in search of food. Swamps steamed under the heavy sun, and rivers cut through valleys with a voice that never ended. Above it all, pterosaurs glided across the burning sky. Their wings stretched wide against clouds that drifted slowly over the ancient earth. It was a world alive with endless struggle and endless beauty. In this world there lived a predator whose name would echo long after its kind had vanished. Albertosaurus was not the largest of the tyrant lizards, yet it was fast, fierce, and cunning. Its body was built leaner than its cousin Tyrannosaurus, and that difference gave it an edge. Where the larger hunters relied on brute force, Albertosaurus relied on speed and endurance. It could close the distance to its prey with terrifying swiftness, striking before the victim could react. Every part of its body told the story of a hunter perfected by time. Its skull was long, its jaws lined with sharp teeth, designed to crush bone and tear flesh. Its eyes faced forward, granting it the vision of a true predator. Short yet powerful arms hung close to its chest, ending in claws that could tear through struggling prey. Its tail stretched long and balanced, giving stability when it ran. Muscles rippled beneath its scaly hide as it moved through the forest, and plains of shadow of death that seemed to appear and vanish with the shifting light. Every step was measured, every breath tuned to the rhythm of survival. The world it hunted and was unforgiving. Herds of hadrosaurs moved in great numbers, filling the fields with the sound of hooves and calls. These plant-eaters were swift and strong, relying on numbers to protect themselves from predators. They watched the horizon with wary eyes, knowing that danger never slept. Among them, mothers shielded their young with their bodies, forming protective circles when the shadows of hunters appeared. The survival of one depended on the survival of many. For Albertosaurus, this meant patience and strategy. It could not simply charge into the herd. It had to choose its moment with care. Other predators roamed the land as well. Packs of smaller raptors darted between trees, hunting in groups with coordinated speed. Giant crocodiles lurked in rivers, striking at anything that came too close to the water's edge. Even among the tyrant lizards, there were rivals. Some Albertosaurus hunted alone, while others were thought to move in loose groups where competition could turn to cooperation depending on hunger and opportunity. In such a land, only the most adaptable survived. The hunter's story was one of both power and constant risk. As dawn broke across the horizon, the forest stirred with sound. Birds the size of wolves screeched in the canopy, their wings rattling leaves as they took flight. Small mammals rushed through the undergrowth, hiding in burrows as the light spread. A herd of young hadrosaurs moved toward the river, their calls rising together as they walked. Among the shadows at the edge of the clearing, the Albertosaurus waited. Its breath was slow, its body low against the earth. Every muscle coiled with quiet tension. The hunt was written in its bones. It studied the herd with relentless focus. Each step of the hadrosaurs told a story of strength and weakness. The predator's eyes sought the smallest gap, the slowest stride, the young one straying just far enough from its mother's side. For Albertosaurus, a single mistake by the herd was an invitation. Silence cloaked its movements as it began to shift forward step by step. Leaves bent beneath its feet, yet made no sound. Its gaze locked onto a juvenile at the edge of the herd. The creature was curious, straying farther than the others, its calls unanswered in the crowd. The predator inched closer. Its jaws parted ever so slightly, revealing the glint of teeth. Its nostrils flared, catching the scent of prey carried on the morning air. Hunger burned in its chest, but instinct held it back. It could not reveal itself too soon. The power of Albertosaurus was not only in its body, but in its patience. It could wait longer than its prey. It could stalk until the moment was perfect. The forest held its breath as predator and prey played the ancient game of survival, one side unaware, the other alive only for the hunt. The land shaped the hunter, as much as the hunter shaped the land. Albertosaurus had grown in a place of storms where floods reshaped rivers and fires swept across dry plains. It had seen the sky blacken with ash and the earth tremble with force. Through it all it survived, not because it was invincible, but because it adapted. It could feast on the weak when times were good and scavenge the dead when times were harsh. Nothing was wasted and nothing was ignored. The law of survival was not glory but endurance. This truth was written in its every scar. Even in times of hunger, Albertosaurus stood as a figure of dominance. Smaller hunters fled when it appeared, leaving behind scraps of their kills. The shadow of its form was enough to clear a clearing. The sound of its roar shook the forest, carrying across miles with a promise of power. It was a voice that said the land was not safe, the river not free, the plains not secure. It was the sound of authority in a world where only the strongest ruled. Yet behind that voice was a constant reminder that strength could always be challenged. This was the life of Albertosaurus. To live was to fight. To fight was to survive. To survive was to carve its story into the bones of the earth. Every step across the land, every strike of its jaws, every roar against the sky was a chapter written in the book of survival. Its world was one of endless struggle, yet within that struggle lay a strange beauty. The beauty of balance, the beauty of life. Continuing despite the shadow of death, Albertosaurus was not just a beast of fury. It was a part of the eternal rhythm of the Cretaceous. The day moved on. The sun rose higher, burning the land with its fire. The herd shifted closer to the river, unaware of the shadow that tracked them. In the silence of the forest, in the breath of the wind, in the steady thrum of the earth, a story was beginning. A story not of mercy, but a hunger, not of peace, but a survival. And at its center stood the hunter, with eyes sharp and unyielding, a figure of strength and speed. The story of Albertosaurus had begun, and it would be written in blood and in silence. The sun climbed high over the ancient land, and the shadows shortened. The herd of hadrosaurs moved slowly toward the river, still unaware of the predator that watched from the forest edge. Albertosaurus kept low its breath, steady, its muscles coiled like drawn bowstrings. The young one at the edge of the herd wandered farther, distracted by low plants near the clearing. The predator saw the chance. The distance between hunter and prey was closing with each quiet step. Then a branch cracked beneath the weight of its foot. The sound was faint, but in a world of constant danger, even the smallest signal meant alarm. Heads rose across the herd. Calls of warning cut through the still air. The herd pressed together, their tails swaying as they prepared to flee. The young one froze, confused by the sudden change. For Albertosaurus, hesitation meant nothing. It burst from the shadows in a storm of speed. The earth trembled under its charge. Its jaws opened wide, flashing rows of deadly teeth. The herd scattered in panic, dust rising into the air as dozens of bodies surged toward the river. Mothers shielded their young with desperate cries. Yet the juvenile at the edge was too slow. Albertosaurus closed the gap in seconds, its strides powerful, its balance perfect. The juvenile squealed, trying to flee, but the predator lunged, its jaws clamping down with brutal force. Flesh tore, bone cracked, and the hunt ended with a roar that echoed through the valley. The predator shook to kill, thrashing the body until it stilled. Blood stained the grass beneath its claws. Victory filled the air, yet the hunt was not without risk. The noise had drawn attention. Across the forest, smaller raptors circled, their eyes fixed on the prize. They were quick pack hunters who relied on numbers, not size. They knew they could not challenge Albertosaurus in a direct fight, but they could harass and steal. Already they crept closer, their hisses sharp, their claws scraping the earth. Albertosaurus lifted its head, its mouth dripping with blood. It released a thunderous roar, shaking the air like a storm. The sound rolled across the trees, sending birds shrieking into the sky. The raptors hesitated, but hunger drove them forward. They darted in, snapping at the carcass before darting out again. Their eyes glowed with daring. Albertosaurus swung its head, snapping at one that came too close. Its teeth closed on empty air, but the raptor tumbled back, screeching in alarm. The others circled, restless, waiting for another chance. The predator knew this was no easy victory. To keep its kill, it would need to fight. It lowered its body over the carcass, its tail lashing the ground, its eyes fixed on the circling thieves. The standoff stretched the forest, filled with tension as predator faced predator. Finally, one of the raptors lunged too bold to resist. Albertosaurus struck with blinding speed. Its jaws snapped shut around the smaller hunter, crushing it in an instant. The body fell limp to the ground. The others shrieked in rage, but their courage faltered. Slowly they backed away, their hunger unable to outweigh the risk. The hunt was defended. For a time, Albertosaurus fed in peace. Its teeth ripped through the flesh, its stomach filled with warmth and strength. Yet the world of the Cretaceous never allowed peace for long. Far across the plain, another sound rose, a deep bellow heavier and more powerful than the raptors. From the distance, another shape appeared, larger than Albertosaurus, its body marked with scars, its steps slow yet steady. This was another tyrant, lizard or rival, whose hunger matched its own. The land was wide, but food was scarce. For both hunters, survival often meant conflict. Albertosaurus raised its head again, its eyes narrowing at the approaching rival. The air grew thick with the promise of battle. The rival roared, announcing its claim to the carcass. The sound shook the ground and scattered smaller animals in terror. Albertosaurus stood firm, its body tense, its jaws dripping red from its meal. It answered with its own roar, a sound that spoke not just a hunger, but a defiance. The two predators faced each other across the clearing, both unwilling to yield. The rival advanced step by step, circling closer. Albertosaurus moved to block the carcass, its tail sweeping behind for balance. Muscles rippled across its frame, every motion a warning. The rival lunged suddenly, snapping its jaws with force that could break stone. Albertosaurus dodged sideways, the teeth closing on air. It countered with strike of its own jaws, grazing the rival's shoulder. Blood sprayed, but the wound was shallow. The forest erupted with the sound of battle. They clashed again, their bodies slamming together like crashing boulders. Teeth tore at scales, claws raked at flesh. Dust rose around them as they struggled for dominance, each roar louder than the last. The rival snapped at Albertosaurus's neck, missing by inches. Albertosaurus bit into the rival's flank, tearing a strip of flesh free. The rival bellowed in pain, staggering back, yet it did not fall. Hunger and fury drove it forward again. The fight raged on as the sun burned high. Each predator circled, panting, blood dripping from fresh wounds. Neither could claim easy victory. Yet Albertosaurus had the advantage of speed. It darted in and out, striking before the rival could fully react. Slowly it wore the larger hunter down. At last, with a burst of power, Albertosaurus lunged, sinking its teeth deep into the rival's leg. Bone cracked under the force. The rival roared, stumbling as it tried to shake free. Pain weakened its stance, and Albertosaurus pushed harder, driving it back step by step. Finally, the rival gave a last furious roar before turning away. Limping heavily, it retreated into the forest, leaving behind a trail of blood. The challenge was over. Albertosaurus stood victorious, though its body bore the marks of the struggle. Cuts lined its high, blood seeped from shallow wounds, yet its strength remained. It raised its head to the sky and roared once more, the sound carrying across the land a declaration of dominance. The carcass was its prize, yet the victory meant more. In a world where every day was a battle, Albertosaurus had proven its place. Strength alone was not enough. It was speed, cunning, and endurance that gave it the edge. Rivals would come again, hunger would never cease, but for now it ruled the clearing. The balance of the land shifted with every battle, with every hunt. Today the predator had carved another chapter into its story of survival. As night approached, the forest grew colder. Stars burned above while the land hushed in shadow. Smaller creatures moved in silence, wary of the predator that still fed in the clearing. Albertosaurus tore the last pieces from the carcass. Its hunger finally eased. It dragged the remains into the shadows, leaving little for scavengers. Its breath steamed in the cool night air, its body heavy with exhaustion, yet strong with victory. The day had tested its strength and its patience. It had endured. The rising moon painted the land silver. Across the plains, the herd slept gathered in tight circles for protection. In the river, crocodiles floated like logs, their eyes glowing faint in the starlight. Owls screeched from the trees, hunting small prey that rustled in the undergrowth. And in the heart of the forest, Albertosaurus rested, its body scarred, its belly full, its spirit unbroken. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new hunts, new rivals. Yet tonight it lay as a master of the land, breathing slow, its eyes watching the dark. The morning sun broke through the trees, spilling gold across the land. Albertosaurus rose from its resting place, its muscles stiff from the wounds of the last battle. Flies circled the scars on its hide. Each breath carried the weight of exhaustion, yet hunger drove it forward again. In this age there was no pause for weakness. Survival never allowed rest for long. It moved through the forest, following the scent of prey. The wind carried the musk of hadrosaurs once more, but the trail was faint. The herd had moved deeper into the valley, where open plains stretched wide. Albertosaurus followed slowly, each step steady, its head low, scanning the world with predatory focus. By midday it reached the valley. Herds grazed across the fields, unaware of its watchful gaze. Yet something else stirred the air. A deep sound rolled across the plain like thunder. The earth trembled with each step that followed. From the far side of the valley another predator appeared, larger, heavier, and more brutal than any the land had shown before. It was not the rival from before, but another giant, an older one scarred from decades of battle. This was the true tyrant of the valley. Albertosaurus froze, its instincts screaming warning. The giant head rose high above its own, its jaws broader, its teeth like daggers carved from stone. The herds bolted at once, their cries echoing as dust filled the sky. The plain emptied in seconds, leaving only the two predators. Silence fell, but it was not peace. It was a silence before a storm. The giant fixed its eyes on Albertosaurus. Hunger burned in its gaze, but so too did dominance. The carcass of a fallen hadrosaur lay nearby, a fresh kill already claimed. The giant had fed, but still it stood tall, unwilling to let another hunter near. Albertosaurus knew the choice. It could turn away and survive, or it could fight and risk everything. Yet the land was shrinking, food was scarce, and retreat meant weakness. Weakness meant slow death. It roared, the sound raw and defiant. The giant answered with a bellow so loud it shook the valley walls. Birds scattered into the sky. Dust lifted as the two titans began to circle each other, tails whipping across the ground, jaws wide, eyes sharp. The plain belonged to neither, yet both would claim it. The first charge came from the giant. Its massive bulk thundered forward, jaws snapping with a force to crush bone. Albertosaurus leapt aside, just in time, the teeth slicing the air where it had stood. It countered with a strike to the giant's side, its teeth sinking into flesh. Blood sprayed across the grass, but the bite was shallow. The giant bellowed, twisting its body and slamming its head sideways. The impact threw Albertosaurus back, crashing to the ground. Pain shot through its ribs, yet it scrambled up again, its breath harsh, its eyes locked on its enemy. They clashed once more. Jaws met with a sound of grinding stone. Teeth scraped against teeth, sparks of fury flashing in the air. The giant pressed forward, its strength overwhelming, its body heavier, its jaws deadlier. Albertosaurus struggled, pushing with every muscle, yet step by step it was forced back. Its claws raked at the giant's chest, drawing red lines across thick hide. The giant roared in rage, but pressed harder, its bulk crushing the ground beneath. Albertosaurus twisted, suddenly ducking low and slipping free. It darted to the side, striking the giant's leg. Its teeth tore deep this time, ripping muscle. The giant staggered with a scream of fury, its massive body shuddering. Dust rose around them, both predators panting, bleeding, their roars shaking the air. The valley became a battlefield. The giant lunged again, its jaws snapping shut on Albertosaurus's tail. Pain tore through its body as the giant shook it like a rag. Flesh ripped, blood poured, yet Albertosaurus did not surrender. With desperate fury, it swung its body around, slamming its claws against the giant's face. The strike gouged across an eye. The giant howled, stumbling back, blinded on one side. Now wounded and enraged, the giant thrashed, wildly snapping at empty air. Albertosaurus seized a chance. It lunged forward with all its remaining strength, its jaws clamping down on the wounded leg once more. This time it did not let go. It bit deeper, pulling harder, twisting its head side to side. Bone cracked under the relentless force. The giant collapsed to one knee, the ground trembling beneath its fall. Yet even weakened, the giant fought on. It swung its head blindly, snapping its jaws. Albertosaurus barely dodged teeth that could still end its life in one strike. The battle dragged on, each predator bleeding, each breath heavy with exhaustion. The plain was stained with red, the air thick with dust and rage. At last the giant tried to rise, but its broken leg gave way. It crashed to the earth, its body shaking the ground like an earthquake. Albertosaurus circled, panting, its eyes locked on its fallen rival. The giant roared one last time, a sound that echoed with defiance even in defeat. Albertosaurus lunged, once more sinking its teeth into the exposed throat. Blood gushed in a torrent. The roar cut short, fading into silence. The giant's body shuddered, then stilled its weight, sinking into the ground. The plain fell quiet again. Only the wind whispered across the valley, carrying the smell of blood. Albertosaurus stood over the fallen tyrant, its body torn, its skin marked with deep wounds, its breath ragged. Pain seared through every muscle, yet it remained standing. Against a giant it had endured. Against death itself it had refused to yield. It lifted its head to the sky and roared. The sound rolled across the valley, across the rivers and forests, across the very bones of the earth. It was a cry of triumph and survival. In that moment, Albertosaurus was no longer just a predator. It was a symbol of defiance carved into the age of giants. The herds watched from the distance, their fear still thick. Smaller predators lurked at the edges, waiting for scraps. But none dared move closer. The victor claimed the land to kill and the silence. For now the valley belonged to Albertosaurus. It limped to the fallen giant, placing one clawed foot upon its chest. The air was heavy with the weight of finality. This battle was not just about food. It was about existence. It was about proving that even among monsters, strength alone did not rule. Endurance, cunning, and will to fight carved the true kings of the land. As the sun set, painting the sky in blood red and gold, the figure of Albertosaurus stood tall against the horizon. Scarred, bleeding, yet unbroken, it breathed deep the air of victory. The climax of its struggle was not glory but survival. Survival was the only truth in this world, and it had earned another day. The valley lay in silence after the thunder of battle. The body of the fallen giant rested heavy against the earth, its bulk like a mountain of flesh and bone. Dust had settled over the plain, turning red, where blood had soaked deep into the ground. Above, the sky stretched wide and endless, painted with the soft glow of dusk. The storm of roars had faded, but the echo of it lingered in the air of memory written into the land itself. Albertosaurus stood alone against the horizon, its breath harsh and ragged. Each step was pain, yet each step carried meaning. Its hide was torn, its tail heavy with wounds, its muscles trembling from exhaustion. Still it remained upright. It had fought death and endured. In this world of giants, that was all that mattered. It turned toward the carcass of its rival. The giant's blood still steamed faintly in the cooling air. Scavengers circled above, their wings black shadows against the dimming sky. Albertosaurus let out a deep growl, low and steady. The message was clear. The land to kill and the silence belonged to it. None dared descend. Not yet. It fed, slowly tearing flesh from the fallen tyrant. Each bite was both a victory and a necessity. Food meant strength, food meant survival. Yet the kill was more than a meal. It was proof of dominance, proof of will. The wounds across its body burned, but the blood it swallowed gave new fire to its veins. For a time the pain faded, replaced by the simple act of survival. Night fell, and with it came the chill. The stars appeared one by one across the dark canopy above. The moon rose, casting pale light across the plain where two titans had clashed. Albertosaurus settled near the carcass, its head low, its eyes half closed. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the sting of wounds and the distant cries of creatures in the dark. Still it rested, for rest was as vital as a hunt. Tomorrow would bring new trials, but tonight it had endured. The days that followed were slow and heavy. Albertosaurus moved little at first, keeping close to the carcass. It fed when hunger returned and lay in the grass, allowing its body to heal. The valley became its territory by right of victory. Smaller predators gathered at the edges, their eyes gleaming in the shadows. They smelled weakness in its limp, they smelled opportunity. Yet none dared strike. The memory of its roar was still fresh. Time shaped its recovery. Flesh knitted over wounds, leaving scars that told the story of battle. Each step grew steadier, though pain never vanished fully. The limb became part of its stride, a mark of survival. The valley itself shifted with the change. Herds returned, warily grazing once more in the distance. The river carried life again as it always had. The rhythm of the land continued indifferent to the clash of giants, yet shaped by it all the same. Albertosaurus hunted once more, though with care. It no longer charged blindly into herds. It studied with patience, waiting for the weak to slow the young. Each kill was swift and decisive. The memory of the giant had taught it the cost of recklessness. Strength alone was not enough. Endurance and cunning made survival possible. This was the law of the Cretaceous. Seasons passed across the valley. Storms swept the land, bringing floods that reshaped the riverbanks. Fire burned through grasslands, leaving black scars, soon covered by green growth. Through it all, Albertosaurus remained. It stood at the edge of the plains, its eyes watching every shadow, every herd, every rival. No challenge came as great as the giant, but the scars on its body reminded it that death was always near. One evening, as the sun sank low, painting the sky in orange, and read a herd of hadrosaurs cross a plain. Their calls rose together, a sound of life echoing across the valley. Albertosaurus stood in the tall grass, silent, its gaze sharp. It no longer hunted with desperation, but with purpose. When the moment came, it moved swift as a shadow cutting off a straggler from the herd. The kill was quick to chase short. It fed as the sky darkened. The law of survival had not changed. With each passing day, Albertosaurus's story became part of the land itself. Bones buried in the earth would one day tell the tale of its battles. The scars across its hide told the story to its rivals. The roar it unleashed across the valley carried the truth to every ear. It was not invincible, yet it was unyielding. In a world where death ruled, Albertosaurus lived not by chance, but by will. The resolution of its struggle was not peace, for peace did not exist in this age. The resolution was endurance. To rise after the fall, to hunt, after the wound, to roar after the silence. The valley would remember its steps, the herds would remember its shadow, and the scavengers would remember its defiance. For as long as it drew breath, Albertosaurus carved its place in the ancient world. The sun dipped beyond the horizon, painting the world in fire and shadow. Albertosaurus stood on a ridge above the valley, its silhouette sharp against the crimson sky. The wind carried the scent of herds moving below and the faint cries of smaller hunters daring to scavenge at the edges of the land. Yet none approached the ridge. The presence of the scar hunter was enough to hold the plain in silence. Its body bore the memory of battles carved in deep scars across its hide. Each mark told of survival, of wounds endured, of rivals faced. It was not the largest predator nor the strongest, but it was relentless. In this ancient world, relentlessness was power. The valley stretched endless before its eyes. Herds grazed, rivers flowed, storms gathered in the distance. Life continued, as it always had, indifferent to victories or defeats. Yet Albertosaurus had claimed a truth few could deny. It had outlasted giants, it had faced storms of tooth and claw, and it had risen again each time. It lifted its head and released a roar. The sound rolled across the land, echoing off the cliffs and forests, scattering flocks into the air. It was not a cry of challenge nor hunger. It was a declaration, a promise to the land that though death circled in every shadow, Albertosaurus would not bow. As the stars emerged one by one, the hunter descended from the ridge and vanished into the tall grass. Its shadow blended with the darkness, its steps steady, unbroken. The night swallowed it, yet the echo of its roar lingered in the air, a sound carried across ages. In time, the world would change. Rivers would dry, mountains would rise, oceans would swallow plains. Creatures would vanish into the dust of history. Yet for this moment in the heart of the Cretaceous, Albertosaurus lived as storm and survivor. Its legacy was not carved in stone, but in the breath it still drew, in the blood that still pulsed, in the will that refused to yield. The valley slept beneath the stars. The age of giants roared on. Albertosaurus remained,